Brilliant. Excellent. So thank you to we're now in the third session, Learning Through Play, the Early Years Perspective. We're joined by Melanie Coles, who's an Early Years Senko at the Birmingham Children's Centre in London. I think one of the things that we said when we were putting this conference together is we didn't want it to be focused on one sector, because, we wouldn't be very good at, practicing what we preach if we're saying that drama's a Cinderella subject, SEND is a Cinderella part of, provision, and then we didn't look at development from each stage of the child's learning process. So many of the things that Shelley raised were linked around this idea that these are habits that people have. People use this language, and so parents use like this. So we are going to learn a little bit about the early years setting. So if you're someone like me who has taken interest but doesn't know very much, I've gone through Mel's things and they're fascinating. And I know that, she'll be very, very modest about it, but she is a wealth of knowledge and experience, in this area. And I think often the more joined up thinking we do, the better, our understanding of our learners is. If they are lucky enough to come with an EHCP, chances are they have, they've spent some time with someone like Mel. And so what Mel's been doing with them, or others have been doing, will make a massive difference to how they view themselves or how their parents view, education. So, Mel, over to you.
Okay, am I on? Sorry, hello. Thank you, Chris, for that lovely introduction, and for me not hearing myself echoing. I'm going to be hiding mostly behind this PowerPoint slide, but we will do a little bit of Makaton later, so be ready to use your hands and your faces. As an aside, think about people with social anxiety. Which occupation do you think they are most likely to have? It's teachers. Yes, but that's okay because we're also actors. So I've got my little curtains here because I want to use an analogy of teaching or education being like a theatre, and teachers being the performers. They have a script, they're planning, they have an audience, the children, and they take on a role, or sometimes several roles, and they need to work very hard to keep the attention of the audience. Well, in early years, there is rarely a monologue, which is what I'm about to do, so that's a bit strange for me. And often we are a troupe of actors with the teacher as the lead, or perhaps the teacher is the director. So I think early years, and I work in a nursery class and have done for a long time, we are the pantomime in the theatre of education. And so that means that we can be a bit silly, which is a lot of fun, but it's also hard work, because as pantomime prepares young people for enjoying theatre, early year settings prepare children to enjoy learning at school. We are not preparing them to enter a meat grinder or a conveyor belt, which I confess is how I see the traditional transmission model that many schools are still adopting, which is a really kind way of putting it, I think. So in introduction, I want to say that play and drama and imagination are absolutely fundamental to all children's development. And we have to work even harder to protect that in this new era of playing catch up after the isolation of lockdown and all these concerns about what children have missed academically. But what about their childhood? What about their confidence and their social skills? How are we promoting their resilience and their flexibility? So, the role of early years and some challenges. And when I picked that clip art, I didn't know it was going to do that, but I love it. Meet the hungry caterpillar. So our curriculum, the early years foundation stage, is about to change again, as many curriculums do, but not too drastically. I'll go through it a little bit. We have 7 areas of learning, which are all interconnected and all important. And the 3 prime areas are the most important foundations for all learning. And those are communication and language, physical development, and personal, social, emotional development. The specific areas are more familiar in lots of schools: literacy, maths, understanding the world, which is like science, and expressive arts and design. We're very lucky in the early years. Our curriculum is focused not so much on what they are learning, but more on how they are learning, which is that green strip there. The characteristics of effective learning is also needs to be a really heavy emphasis for us. So the characteristics of effective learning help us to keep that in mind. Some examples of some of those, which are now in the new curriculum termed characteristics of effective learning and teaching, which is fine, that works too. Some examples are showing curiosity about people, events and objects, persisting when challenges occur, finding ways to solve problems, finding new ways to do things, and showing satisfaction in meeting your own goals. The Very Hungry Caterpillar is not, as you might expect, required reading. There isn't a recommended scheme of work for it. The content is very much up to us. So I'm just going to show you an example of a midterm plan. This was autumn 19. This was just before the pandemic kind of changed everything. And we had a topic. I like using topics. You don't have to. I like a bit of continuity. So our topic was me and my family and winter festivals, because it was that time of year. There were lots of them. So I'm not sure how well you can see on the screen, but we had core books that we focus on. We have activities in each area of learning linked to the topic, some of them linked to children's interests that we've observed. You cannot be a slave to the topic, which at the beginning I was. I didn't know that you couldn't be. It doesn't look like a lot of planning for a whole term. And that's because it's a working document. All of this can change, and I think it probably did. And lots of activities will be inspired week by week based on children's interests and needs. So in early years, we do get on the floor with the children and we get our hands dirty, but it's a lot more than changing nappies and knowing the Hungry Caterpillar off by heart. Our curriculum relies really heavily on adult knowledge of child development and also the knowledge of individual children's skills and interests. So we start every planning cycle with observing where the children are and where their interests lie. Then we build on what they know and what they can do. We plan, but we need to plan flexibly because we need to allow plenty of room for following changing interests. So I'll show you then an example of a weekly plan. Excuse the messy writing. Lots of people have contributed to this. Again, it's a working document and it changes as the week goes on. So we have in the first kind of chunk on the left of the screen, a focus activity is happening each day. That might be something that's drawn from the midterm plan, or it might be something based on children's interests that were observed the previous week. Down the column on the right hand side, we've got group learning intentions, and I'm not sure if you can see, but they're a really wide range, again, in each area of learning, and that's what we're focusing on for the week through all of those activities, so in different contexts. And down at the bottom, the bits that have been crossed out are children's names, because each week we'll have observed particular children, noted their interests, their needs, their strengths, thought about what their next steps are, and planned activities specifically towards supporting those as well. And then of course all of this is evaluated and it feeds into the planning for the following week. We're also very lucky because it's a statutory requirement that our children learn through play, which makes me very happy. The beauty of learning through play is that there are no boundaries. It's not divided into subjects, it really can't be. In early settings, our learning is almost entirely cross-curricular. So that gives us as teachers a lot of freedom, but it comes with the requirement to be quite flexible. So where do children with SEND fit into all of this? And the answer can only be everywhere. They might not be following a typical pattern of development, or perhaps they are, but they might be developing more slowly in certain areas. But our way of working is all about approaching each child as an individual and supporting them accordingly. So in general, I would say good practice for SEND is good practice for early years and vice versa. There are, of course, some differences and some extra things that we need to do, and I'll give some examples of that later. But for now, just please inscribe on your brains that every teacher is a teacher of children with SEND. They are not, or it cannot be, a separate thing, an add-on, footnote, an afterthought in your planning, and it's never a thing for somebody else to do, as Chris was speaking about a little bit earlier. All of our children have potential, obviously, wherever they are. Oh, thank you, someone's clapping. So when you see that question on my slide, what are the challenges of pupils with SEND? What came to your mind first? You don't have to tell me. I can guess it might have been a child who refuses to sit still. It might be having your hair pulled out, having your arm bitten, piles of paperwork, angry parents. We could go through all of those challenges that they may present us with, but I think it's more useful to consider the challenges that we present them with. And that could be positive challenges where we're helping them to move forward in their learning. It could also be negative challenges, because the main challenge, I think, for pupils with SEND is ultimately us. The education system has got pegs. I know Shelley talked about the picture of the jigsaw pieces and so on. The education system has pegs that most children will probably fit into, more or less. So is our main challenge as teachers to find a way to make these children fit into them, or is it to change ourselves, change our practice, and maybe just throw away the pegboard altogether? So what I want us to think about, in contrast with the traditional heavy emphasis on literacy and numeracy, is the importance of learning and self-expression through play, and how play helps us to build a more inclusive space. So the child who might sadly in some schools be stuck at the back of the class colouring something in can join in like everyone else on an equal footing. And there's a really lovely quote here that kind of illustrates that, but I can leave you to read that later because I might take too much time. But play can create a more just world where everyone is an equal and valued participant. So learning through play is cross-curricular. As I said, it cannot not be. So thinking about why play is fundamental to development, I've put some great quotes on the screen that you can digest later. So if you don't believe me, listen to Jung and Roald Dahl and Albert Einstein and Abraham Maslow. I'm not just passionate about play because it's a statutory requirement. So play and being playful is the center of everything we do. It's the core of good early years practice, and it's a travesty to walk into a school and see play being used as a reward at the end of the day when our work, which is of course more important, is finished. That's not okay. Any setting where this happens is not valuing play, and everyone involved is missing out. Teachers are missing out on a really powerful tool for learning. The children are being robbed of the most natural way for them to learn. And I saw this in my first teaching practice and I wanted to turn around and go home, but it's okay. It's not always like that, and we can make sure of that. So what we want to see in learners of all ages, not just early years, is intrinsic motivation, in bold on the screen in front of you. So Dweck in 2006, among others, acknowledged the role of play in children becoming thinkers and learners. And feeling engaged and empowered through play leads to developing a growth mindset, which I hope you've all heard of. Having a growth mindset means you're learning through trial and error, you're trying new things, you're bouncing back when something's difficult, you're seeking challenge, you're resilient, you're persistent, all characteristics of effective learning, as you've seen in our curriculum. In play, it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to try new things. That is how we learn. We all know that, but are we promoting that in the way that we teach? So, you know, allowing that encourages a growth mindset. Any notion of right and wrong will promote a fixed mindset where somebody is passive, they're afraid to take a leap, and they're self-limiting. We can turn that around, we can, but we'd rather not be there in the first place. And I have been, and I've had some heartbreaking conversations with 3-year-olds trying to explain to them that it's okay to make mistakes. That's quite disturbing. So a growth mindset is linked to self-regulation, independent learning, and intrinsic motivation, a love of learning, which I hope that all the children I teach at nursery will be leaving with if they didn't start with it. Learning through play and real experiences will always lead to a deeper level of learning because of the higher level of involvement that children invest in it. If you think about further up in the school, how many children struggled with their times tables, but they knew all the Pokemon in the Pokedex off by heart. which just shows if you see where their interests lie, you will see their real potential for learning. So I've stolen from a really lovely booklet called Playing to Learn, which there's a reference at the end, this little chart showing different types of play that you might see in my classroom. You have pure or free play, which is freely chosen by the child, completely under their control, highly creative, open-ended, highly imaginative. You might, I've skipped a bit, I'll come back to it, never mind. You might see more likely child-initiated or child-led play, which has many characteristics in common with free play, but it is guided by certain expectations in an early years setting. So it is play with learning consequences. I really like that term. Anyway, going back to the bit that I skipped, in true play, you can try anything, you can be anything, and children might rehearse something that they've done or something they might want to do. They might be processing something that made them happy and they want to relive it, or something traumatic that they need to understand. I'm going to give an example of hospital role play that we set up for a little girl called Holly, who told her mum she's afraid of hospitals. Her grandma had just died in one, so fair enough. So we were thinking to give her the opportunity to talk that through in a safe space if she needed to. Thinking about links with different curriculum areas, that's looking at the area of making relationships and communication, language, speaking and listening. A little girl called Mariam joins in. Now Mariam's mum told me that she's afraid of having her preschool booster. There's a really noisy aeroplane. We're on a flight path. She's afraid of having her preschool booster, so Mariam spent all morning pretending to give the other children injections, which I think did great, good for her self-confidence and self-awareness. She also made notes on a chart and she tried to sound out the word injection. So there's some physical development right there. She's holding a pencil and obviously some literacy learning is going on. Now, Henry, to put it nicely, Henry is learning to give other children space and he's learning to be gentle. And Henry wants to be a doctor. He really wants to join in. And Henry needs to learn that if he wants to join in, he needs to listen to instructions and follow so that's in the area of managing feelings and behavior that Henry's working in, and also his listening and attention skills will be developing. Abdullah, who's autistic and obsessed with numbers, but finds it really hard to be near other children. So what we really want to see is just Abdullah coming over to the hospital role play when there are other children there. That's an important goal for him. We get Henry to show him the numbers on the chart on the clipboard, and that encourages him to spend a bit of time in the role play. So a bit of maths going on between those two boys and making relationships as well. And the umbrella over all of that, the intention was actually in understanding the world, people and communities, for children to show interest in different occupations. So I hope that's a good example of a lot of different learning happening within one thing. Something else you might see in an activity like that is that play is a universal language, I would say, communication without words. A lot of it is non-verbal, if it, even with children who can speak. So it's a very inclusive medium, and young children, I think, are really good at naturally supporting each other and just accepting each other's differences as they are. They've not yet developed some of those ideas that might make that more difficult. So, I mean, having said that, you might see that our children with SEND who are developing differently or more slowly, that the way they play might not always correspond with their age. So we might be looking at the way that children play, and you might have the early kind of exploratory stage where they're experimenting, and that might move into more functional play and then onto symbolic, which is important. We want to see that because it supports language learning and literacy and numeracy later on. But obviously in a more fun way. So as an example, you've got a Brio train track, and a child who's exploring and experimenting might want to throw the pieces, put the train in their mouth and so on, explore the way that it feels. Functional play might be actually putting that train track together and running the train along it. And symbolic play, they're going to be making up stories about where their train might be going. Time to move on. We've been on that slide for a very long time. So how do we support learning through play? I hope that everyone is familiar with my friend Vygotsky. and the social construction of knowledge. I want to see lots of nods here. Good, thank you. And the notion of the zone of proximal development, which is that's where we work in early years and hopefully beyond early years. So that is the distance between what a child can achieve alone and what they can achieve with the support of an adult or another peer. And my friend Bruna, also in 1978, coined the term scaffolding for the support that might help a child to cross into their ZPD. So that's what we do. That's my job. My internet connection is unstable. Can everyone still hear me? I'm going to carry on. That seems to describe working in the ZPD, which is where two or more individuals work together in an intellectual way to solve a problem, and so on and so forth. But scaffolding could be as simple as holding the child's hand to give them the confidence to have a go at balancing on something. It doesn't need to be complicated. How do we plan for learning through play? Can everyone hear me? I hope so. Internet connection back. Okay. Planning for pure play, free play isn't entirely possible, but you can certainly plan the environment and the resources that you provide. Although, of course, in an early years classroom, you will find a lot of self-accessible resources, or something's wrong. But yeah, we plan as best we can, very flexibly, based on the children's interests and based on their needs and based on what we're hoping for them to learn. But they may learn that in a different way. That's fine. We need to provide open-ended possibilities and purposeful activities. And we have to not plan too much, because we have to be prepared. And this is really painful because I'm someone who plans a lot, but you have to be prepared to just drop everything. If there's something unexpected, like a snowy day or a windy day, or you need to go to the moon, or anything like that might happen. You should never see a teacher sitting at a table with a small group of miserable looking children trying to write their names, where on the carpet there's a large group of children with a bunch of cardboard boxes going wild with some crayons. Where should that teacher be? I know where you would rather be. You can adapt quickly if you know the curriculum, if you know child development, if you know your children. The intended learning can still happen. It might just happen in a different way. So I'm going to give an example of a little girl called Eliza who loved junk modelling, and we were making rockets for Black History Month, long story. I had hoped to engage Eliza in some mark making, maybe write her name on her rocket, write a few numbers. Eliza doesn't like mark making. Eliza made her rocket. She did not want to make marks on it. That's fine. We are not going to force her. But that afternoon, there were some leftover cardboard boxes in the garden, and Eliza went to the moon, and she covered her rocket in drawings of the buttons that she was going to press. And then we introduced the idea of making tickets to hand out to her friends so that they could come to the moon as well. So really a lot of mark making happened there, and a lot of fun too. And nobody had to be forced to hold a pencil. So scary face, EHCPs, admin, and so on and so forth. So I think, as Chris mentioned earlier, most children in early year settings will not have a diagnosis, and they will not have an EHCP when they arrive. And that's part of my challenge as a SENCO, is working out if they need one and laying all the groundwork to get there before they get to school, ideally. But I'm happy to say, and I hope I'm right for most settings, is that the support that we can offer in an early year setting is often the same as they would have had with an EHCP. It's different when they get to school, but that's something we can often achieve as long as we have the manpower or the woman power to do it. In terms of paperwork, every setting and every school really needs to find out what works for them. So IEPs or SEN support plans or learning plans or whatever you call them, there's always an ongoing debate about whether these are fit for purpose, who writes them, who reads them, who reviews them, how, you know, whatever you call them, they're useless if they're kept in a filing cabinet. They need to come out of there. Otherwise, there's no point in putting in all of that work. You must use them, and I hope that they're well written, because you need to weave them into your planning. As an example, I mean, it's about finding ways for your setting to make that work. So as an example, in my setting, our children do have IEPs, or whatever you want to call them, but they also have a sort of one-page profile or pupil passport, which you should see on the screen now. Obviously, I've taken away the photo and the name, but this was a real child quite early on in nursery class. It gets more complex later as you get more input. But we've got his likes and his dislikes, how best to support him. I've added in there, but in a more reader friendly way, what his goals are and what the strategies are for people to be supporting. And all adults who work in the room need to read that. It's not in a file, it's laminated, it's hung up on a thing in the wall above the planning board, for everybody to refer to whenever they need to remind themselves, or perhaps when I tell a member of staff that they need to go and remind themselves, or if an agency teacher comes in, here you go, read these. We've got a big bunch of them at the moment, but it's really, really important that we're all being consistent and doing the same thing. You might also want, as we have, to have a technical term here, a rota to make sure stuff happens. There's a lot of activities that we plan with good intentions and based on advice we've been given, and again, if it sits in a filing cabinet, it's not going to happen. So we have a rota in my room. A different person each day is assigned with making sure that certain activities happen. Where are we going? Early identification and intervention is really, really important. And I don't do let's wait and see. But in early years, especially when the children are just starting, you know, this is the first time they've been away from home. It's a really strange place for them. And if there's a difficulty, their parents may not even be aware of that yet. They're all individuals, they're still developing, and it might be too early to know if it's something transient, something developmental that they're having difficulty with, if it's just lack of experience, or whether it's something that's going to persist. So we meet them quite early on in their learning journey, and we find out what works for them. You might meet them later, and they might have an EHCP by then, but we're laying the groundwork and we're figuring out what's going on. I just want to say, let's not get obsessed with labels. Child doesn't need a diagnosis to have SEND. I've put the definition up here on the screen in the SEND code of practice, that a child, I've shortened it a bit, has SEN. If they have a learning difficulty, that calls for special educational provision. So if you can see a need there to do something different, there's a need. And special educational provision is termed as educational training provision that's additional to or different from that generally made for everybody else. Fine. That's not that helpful sometimes if you are in that mindset where you're waiting for a diagnosis and you're waiting for a professional to tell you what to do. So you might have that panic moment, oh, it's 26 weeks, we have to wait for an assessment, but the child's here right now, what do I do? And generally what we do is think about what's worked in the past, think about what has worked for children with similar needs, put something in place, don't wait. You might need to be a detective, and you may not have the time to wait for a health professional to step in and tell you what to do. Although a word of caution about doing that is, and if anyone wants to have a go at finishing that sentence in bold there, if you've met a person with autism, and the only way we can end that sentence is, if you've met a person with autism, you've met a person with autism. It's as simple as that. We're looking at individuals, not the labels, which I think Shelley made quite clear before quite well. So I'm going to be a little bit more specific now. How am I doing for time? I have no idea. I'm okay, right. So how exactly are we supporting children in the early years? And I hope that some of these things, or all of these things you see on the screen, are things that are happening further up in schools as well. A lot, if not all, of the additional support that we provide, it benefits all children in the early years, particularly in terms of their language development, and for children who've suffered trauma, children with emotional or social difficulties, or just any children who are experiencing change in their lives. They've moved home or something, you know, some additional structure and boundaries can be very reassuring. Mostly everything that we do is about supporting communication skills, helping children to make sense of their environment, knowing what's expected of them, and knowing about what's happening next. And I have a story for you again from my first teaching practice way back, where I was told that there was a child who was in year 2 and it had been several terms. He'd been refusing to go to the PE lessons with everybody else. He'd been having a complete meltdown or outburst or tantrum, whatever you want to call it, and refused to, when everyone started getting undressed to go through into PE, he would not leave the room to go into the class. So it took quite a while for the teacher detectives to figure out what was going on. What was happening was that he believed that everybody was going into the hall for a pee, and he didn't like that idea. Would you like that idea? Let's all take our clothes off and go into the hall and have a pee. He didn't think that was right, and he was refusing to go. I would say I'm so glad they found out, and now he goes to his PE lessons. But maybe it didn't need to take that long for them to find out. You know, you can make sure that children know what's going on and what's happening without having to go through all of that trauma and so on. So supporting communication and understanding is really important. Another thing, differentiation happens everywhere. Everybody talks about it. And that's about making sure activities are accessible and truly inclusive. So that means when we are planning an adult guided activity or adult led activity, we have to consider a wide range of ways to support or challenge the different children who might come and join in. Rather than simply providing a separate activity. You know, differentiation is a lot more straightforward when you're using worksheets, but we do not use worksheets in the early years. If you walk into an early years classroom and you see one, please grab it and throw it in the recycling. We don't do that. I'm going to give you an example of our differentiation with a shopping role play. We don't only do role play, we do other stuff, but it's really good for examples. So a shopping role play, I've got a little boy called Louis who will argue with you about which potato is the heaviest, and he'll use the weighing scales to prove it. He'll count in 2s to calculate how much he owes you for 3 potatoes at 2p each. I'm really excited about this. That's really high level in my classroom, and I need to extend him perhaps by getting him to write a receipt when he's working in the shop. Another little boy called Zaid finds it really hard to share. He gets overwhelmed by his emotions, and I know he's going to want to be at the till the whole time. So his learning is going to be about learning to take turns. If Musa, who has autism, wants to join in, he has a very particular strategy to show us that he wants to join in, which is he takes something from somebody and he runs away with it. That's his strategy, and it kind of works. But that means if Henry is there, Henry is obsessed with being a policeman. Henry will chase Musa and he will grab him and drag him back to the activity because he wants to be helpful, but Musa can't bear to be touched. So Musa will have a meltdown. So for Henry, well, again, we talked about Henry before. He's learning about giving other children space. And for Musa, we need to model some new strategies for joining in activities. Meanwhile, Raz might decide to turn up. Raz is also autistic and he has severe developmental delay. So he's been assessed at being at the level of 8 to 20 months in most areas, 0 to 11 in communication, but he is the size of a chunky 7-year-old. He'll try to put everything in his mouth, and he's quite large for his age. And if he gets frustrated, he's going to tip the table over. He's not interested in watching what others are doing, and that's a really important goal because that's going to help him with his learning. He does love numbers though, so we might get Henry to instead be helpful him the till, or perhaps Zaid can share the till with Raz to help him. If he watches what they're doing, pressing some buttons with numbers on for a few seconds, and maybe looks at their face for 30 seconds, that's a real achievement. So there you go. But if all of those children arrive at your activity at the same time, you will have your hands full. But that's where teamwork comes in. So that's okay. Right. So some further strategies that I've got going on around the screen in front of you. The first one, it's so simple, you might not even consider it as a strategy, but it might be the most important. And that's just playing with the children, playing alongside them, modeling new language and behaviors. It's probably the thing we do the most for all the children, and it's so valuable, I cannot say, but you need the staff to do it. You know, it might be one-to-one, it might be in a small group. Linked to that is intensive interaction, which is an approach for teaching communication skills to people at a very early stage in their development. And initially that involves totally following their lead and just copying what they do in order to gain their attention and establish a bit of joint attention. Again, you need the staff. I'm going to talk about Makaton in a minute, but I need Chris because the screen share thing needs to, or I might need Shelley. So hit stop. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing with you now so that you can see me a bit better. Can everyone see me as opposed to the screen? No? Okay. I might talk about something else. I'll talk about something else and I'll come back to
do stop share. Sorry.
I did that. Oh, hello. Hi. Can everyone see me on the big screen? Okay, I'm going to greet you in a typical early years way. Hello everyone. Hello everyone. Hello everyone. It's good to see you here. Right. That's weird, isn't it? That's a really weird way to greet people. Okay, it's kind of all right in early years if you've got a good reason for it. It's all right, Chris, we figured it out. We're not screen sharing anymore. Makaton is so valuable and we use it with all of our children to support their language of communication, not just the ones with SEND. But it does need to be natural. Something like, you know, good morning. No, sorry, that's sit down. Good sitting. Good morning. Opening the curtains. But it needs to be natural. It can become very mechanical. And I might perhaps come over here, Shelley. So I might, you know, say, good morning, Chris. And that's all nice and natural. Oh, it's Shelley. She's autistic. Don't worry. I know what to do. Shelley, good sitting. Good listening, good looking. That's weird too. That makes Shelley feel really different and maybe a bit, why am I yelling at her? Shelley, let's sit down. Thank you. Thank you. You can go now.
There was genuine confusion.
Yeah, I know. It's, yeah, you need to be really careful and just practice Makaton in your daily life all the time. I put a link at the end to the Makaton charity website and I strongly promote it. I'm not saying don't sing to the children. We sing a lot all the time. Just think about why you're doing it. So we're going to learn a bit of natural. We're going to learn a bit of Makaton now, and you might be tested at the end. So please pay attention and everyone join in. You're probably waiting for me to start. This is waiting. This is really, really important. We use this one a lot. We're waiting. Lots of signs are intuitive, and something maybe the drama teachers might be, you know, modeling movements. Oh, well done, Shelley and Chris, you're joining in too. It's some verbs. So building, you know, it looks like you're building something. So that's quite easy to remember. Walking, that's pretty obvious. You see, some of these are really easy to remember. Running, that's easy too. Jumping, oh, fall down. It makes sense, doesn't it? It's just supporting understanding. The children don't have to have the manual and go to the training in order to pick up the Makaton from us. We just need to be using it all the time, linking it with what we're doing. Climbing. Finished. It makes sense. Really, really, really important one that lots of our children might be their first Makaton sign they ever learn. More. That might not be so intuitive, but more is really, really important. Then we might build on to more, please. In a really pleading way, please. That's easier to remember. Or thank you is just a quick one. I think that's a few good basic ones. And friends, that's really important too. Okay. But the ones that you're going to see most commonly all over the place are the ones that I use on poor Shelley, but maybe not in such a directive way. We do want to see some good sitting today and some good listening, which you're all doing. So I don't know how to go back to the screen share. Can I please have some technical support? Okay. Sorry, guys. Share screen. Go to that. And does it remember where I am? Share. Sorry, everyone. Oh, resume slideshow. Yay. Okay, brilliant. Phew. Okay, you don't have to look at me anymore. You can look at the screen. Where are we up to? Story time. Story time. You're rarely going to see all of the children sitting on the carpet. It's not the best thing when you've got 33 to 4-year-olds, some of them with additional needs. It's not the best thing for them, and it's not the best thing for you either. It's virtually impossible sometimes. You know, maybe if you're doing some songs. So we'll do story time in smaller groups, and that might be supported by props, signs, songs, visual sequences, acting things out, all sorts of things. And you might need more than one adult for that too. Special time or language groups, I'm sure you'll be familiar with. Those will be tailored specifically to the needs of an individual child or the group, as well as their interests. And you often get some input from the speech and language therapist. And there'll often be some turn taking involved as well. The speech and language therapist is your friend. If anyone here is new to teaching, you need to be friends with that speech and language therapist when you're lucky enough to have them walk into your classroom. You also need to make friends, just a bit of friendly advice here, with the kitchen staff, because they might be cooking your lunch, and the people who clean your room for you. Okay, make friends with the speech and language therapist, the kitchen staff, and the cleaners. Okay. PECS, I don't know if anyone will be familiar with PECS. You might see it being used in your classrooms. That's the picture exchange communication system, and that is to help children who, I'm not going to say non-verbal because of what Shelley said, I'm going to say pre-verbal or minimally verbal, using pictures to express themselves. We might be using some pictures or photos to communicate with the children, but that's a different thing. That's us directing them. But the PECS is theirs for them to communicate with us. Attention Builders or Bucket Time, also known as Attention Autism, is a specific program. They're not paying me, but I'm going to promote them because they're brilliant. I've put a link at the end of my PowerPoint. It's a specific program that helps children build their skills of focused shared attention. Think about, you know, the early groundwork for sustained shared thinking. That's why it's so important. And ultimately, that's going to move them towards learning, hopefully in a mainstream classroom. Look it up. It's lots of fun. It's all about offering an irresistible invitation to learn. You know, why would you not want to do that? So have a look at it. Something else that I hope lots of schools are doing is providing sensory activities for their children who've got needs that Shelley described so well, a sensory circuit happening, and also providing a safe space or a quiet place, and protecting that area from being invaded, so that the children who need it have got an area like that to go to when they need to. Visual support is massive. That's another whole conversation. But just to say that, you know, there may be visual timetables appropriate depending on the age. They might be with pictures, they might be with writing, they might be simple, they might be complex. Very early stage of that would be called the now and next, or the first and then. So I'll just show you an example of that. But we do need to have a word about visuals and rewards where these are being used. The first one that you see is, well, I'd probably call that, you know, a functional, or it's an instruction. First, put your coat on, then we're going to the garden. That's my garden. Sorry, it looks a bit tatty at the moment. We had to hide lots of things because of COVID, but that's before it's been set up in the morning. It's usually more fun. Anyway, first put your coat on, then we're going to the garden. That's fair enough. And it sounds perhaps a bit silly, but when you've got children with sensory needs playing havoc, putting the coat on and taking the coat off is quite an important thing. Pick your battles, but you know that sometimes that's a really important one. So anyway, have a look at the second example I've given you there. You've got a picture of a really dull worksheet with some clocks on it, and you're going to need to figure out what time it is and write it in. If you do that first, then you can play with the set, which might for this child be their favorite thing. So you might see now and next, or first and then visuals being used to encourage a child to do something in order to gain a reward. And this can be very effective. And it's been recognised as good SEN practice for quite some time. I mean, many years back, I was trained to do this. But remember what we said about intrinsic motivation earlier. How can we say that we promote this for all our children, but then use a system to reward our children for SEN for doing their work? So I'm going to ask you now to please challenge that accepted SEN norm wherever you see it. Otherwise, the message you're giving to the children is the activity you want them to do is rubbish. And then you can do something fun. Why don't you just make all of your activities fun and rewarding to some extent, especially if it's something you really want them to do? why not? I mean, okay, attention autism training is going to talk about that a lot if any of you are lucky enough to have a go. But yeah, that's the message there. You know, there might be a specific reason, there might be something a child is particularly struggling with, and maybe they do need a bit of extra motivation, and there might be a health professional involved who's recommended that you do this for something in particular, but just don't assume that this is how it's done. And children with autism, or all children actually, they don't necessarily need a reward, they just need to know what's happening next. So it doesn't really matter too much, as long as you're giving them those pictures. So remember, intrinsic motivation. Moving swiftly on, we're running out of time. Now, I've left something really important to the end, and it's not because it's not important that I've left it to the end. The role of the wider community in educating pupils with SEND. So the wider community we're talking about here is the family. The parents have to be involved every step of the way, and that's not just because the code of practice says so. It's good early years practice. The child and the family come as a package. You can't see the child independently of the environment that they've come from to understand who they are at this point in time. That's true for all children, not just children with SEND. As I said, we will be at the beginning of a journey. And if you can get the family on side, you're kind of more than halfway there. But it can be a really difficult and emotional journey for everyone involved. If there's a diagnosis, you may find that those parents will go through a kind of grieving process. They'll be grieving for the child they thought they were going to have, the future that they thought they were going to have. And it's very painful, and it can take a very long time. I mean, before that, your parents may not accept that something's not quite right with the child, and you need them involved and you need them on side. You can have some really tricky conversations. They have a point. We tell them in general, you know, especially, you know, parents, even things like that, not to compare the children with each other. We mustn't do that. It's a terrible thing. But when it comes to SEND, you kind of have to sometimes, because you need to illustrate that they need something that's additional to and different from what other children need. So you can have some really difficult conversations, but it's worth putting the time and the effort in with the family members, because if you haven't got them working with you, you know, the children are going to go home, and all of the hard work that you've done is going to be undone again. Think about siblings, grandparents, extended family. Who else is involved with this child? Who else is important to them? Because you need everybody on board. And that's not just true for children with SEND, obviously, you know, and we can send books and toys and resources and homework home, but it goes both ways. We need to listen to the families and listen to the children. We need to know what they like at home, what they're interested in, what they do, what's familiar, and we use that knowledge in the classroom with them. The wider school community has also got a big role to play. Have a think about, you know, at all levels, is your school truly inclusive? Are there autism friendly areas? Are there dyslexia friendly classrooms? Is everybody involved on sports day, outings, drama lessons? I'm horrified to hear that sometimes that's not happening. Is everyone's work on display? Everyone's work, or just the best work? And what happens at break time and lunchtime? You know, those kitchen staff who you're hopefully making really good friends with, do they know about your children with needs? If they come across them, do they know the best way to respond to them? What's going on at playtime, break time, when they're all outside? Is there just an adult standing there with a cup of tea? Or do they know what needs to be happening at those times as well? Wow. My monologue is finished. I found some more quotes that I really wanted you to see. So if no one has any questions, we can just read these great quotes about how important play is. And I'll just point out that at the end, I've got a few links there if anybody wants to read a bit more. I put the fun stuff first and then the sort of statutory stuff afterwards. So I might need some technical help, please.
Okay, so yes, thank you so much for that. No, I've been writing frantic notes, and actually the bit that made me think a lot was you were saying about the space is not just the classroom but the actual school. There's a fantastic book I've read about Adam Ockerfield. He's a music ed specialist, but he talks about the fact so much pressure is put on the visual stimulation for autistic pupils, but then no one gives any thought to sound or smell. The idea that classrooms and transitions, they are noisy places, especially big comprehensive schools, 2,000 kids, it's a noisy place. No one thinks about that. Or in a drama studio, people taking their shoes and socks off, the smell. And it's a classic, year nines, triple year nines in a drama studio in summer is traditionally, quite a nasty experience. But if you've got sensory needs, that's an even bigger thing. And I think we often overlook, we talk about it a lot in teaching, we overlook support staff as well, but you're absolutely right. Everyone is involved in this, in the school community. And I think that's fantastic advice for especially, early year teachers that will be listening to this, that actually, everyone's involved. Just because you've got a title teacher doesn't mean that, you are the only person involved in that child's input. I think the also thing is that we looked at language before, and you were mentioning how important it is to have those difficult conversations with parents. How in many cases it's the parents that you're educating more than you are the kids. And I think, what we saw back with Shelley's looking at the Somali community, there is no word for autism in the Somali language. So, in a multicultural school, there may be specific needs. The idea of being new and non-typical is, your child is broken, that kind of language there, the association with a negative thing that means that they're already going to be on the back foot. And so I think, everything we've seen here, and we talked earlier about, before this, about the Dalcroze eurythmics, the idea that, in music ed, you learn music through movement, and that's an accepted practice. Or in dance, the idea that you wouldn't sit and do a workshop. Okay, now we're going to do some dance at the end for the fun. Dance is taught throughout the whole process. So I think as always, you've given us so much to think about. Thank you so much. People in their curriculum, but yeah, absolutely. Often the speaking is the most difficult part of language, so having stopgaps are really, really nice to be able to get rid of them.
I'd just like to sort of come back on what I've written there. Is that it's very easy. We get so used to talking about going to see a play and players and playhouse and all the rest of it, but actually that is at the very root of what we do as dramatists. And that for us in particular, play is absolutely critical. It's at the very roots, not just in terms of child development, but also in terms of our history as a race. That, our very, very ancient tribes learned everything as far as we could see through playing. And it's through playing that you discover the unknown. And interesting what was said earlier about mistakes. One of my students said, I don't talk about mistakes because they're getting so used to hearing it's okay to make mistakes, when you can feel the subtext is it's not really. Whereas he says in his classroom, we just make discoveries. And, play is essentially what we do in order to discover. So it was really lovely to hear all this put together in an updated way. So thank you very much for that. My students next year will listen to this.
All this makes so much sense for every human being, and yet these are the very qualities that the government seems to be most hostile to. What do you make of that?
What I make of that is we're a dying breed in early years. I am a bit scared that we won't be able to work this way forever. I don't know what's going to happen, but I've moved to a different borough because I could see that happening in the borough that I was working in. Early years wasn't being valued. Everyone was getting shoved into nursery classes in schools, very, you know, top-down pressure. Nothing against, you know, the staff who were working in those settings. I just think it's a lot harder for them to work in the way that we do. And you know, good early years settings, well staffed, with the provision that I'm lucky enough in the borough that I'm in to have, and the resources, is expensive. That's the bottom line, really, and that's why we're I mean, I'm lucky the borough I work in currently has 13 children's centres with nursery classes in. That's massive. But the borough I moved from had just cut 2 had just gone, so there were only 3 left in that entire borough, and that's a borough that isn't valuing the early years so much and is just thinking about the money side of things. And yeah, it's political, and it comes back to money, and it's really, really sad, because it's worth it. What could be more, you know, the first 5 years, you know, and play, as Amanda said, you know, it's everything. That's how we develop life skills. I think one of my quotes is about animals, how they play. If you've got a kitten at home, as I have had recently, you know, that play is about now he's actually learned how to catch birds and mice. But all of the games that we were playing, that's what that was all about. It's life skills, and it's the same for us. But you know, we need to keep doing it as well. It's not just early years. But early years is at the moment the place where we're really allowed to do it. And I do fear that might, get whittled away.
I think you know, Chris's wider point, not that we want to bleed into, you know, the politics of things, but I think the most important thing you said about money is clearly there. I mean, the Education Endowment Fund will spend many reams of research saying that, you know, what is the most effective way to bridge a disadvantage gap, whether it be economic or whether it be in specific, you know, groups. It is that joined up high quality teaching from the beginning. Now, inherently the problem there is, you know, high quality is in the eye of the beholder. You know, if you are a classicist that values Latin and values the ability to read and write from, you know, day 0, you know, you're going to put different values and different expectations. I mean, we see it a lot in the drama classroom anyway, and you see it in music ed and you see it in art. Creative subjects are inherently messy. You know, they're not, they can't be done in a sterile way, even if you try, because the efficiency comes in exactly like Amanda said, the creative process, that discovery process. I mean, I think a lot of times secondary teachers they feel acutely when primary doesn't have drama or have that emphasis on play, because you get pupils that arrive and they have no imagination. And I don't mean that in terms of they have no imagination. They've been told that the imaginative side of things is somehow a less important skill, or it's not valued in that way. And, you know, we don't, you know, we teach drama for drama's sake, but those employable skills that are, you know, through play and through discovery and through this mindset, this growth mindset, is something that, you know, if we want to be utilitarian about it, is incredibly valuable moving on. So I think the discussion needs to be about values rather than, you know, clinging to philosophies and saying, oh, it sounds a bit hippie, it sounds a bit that. No, it's about values. You know, what is the most efficient way of getting them to learn? Through play. You know, if you're showing, send learners, let's be really nasty about this, they are expensive because they have all these things attached to them. But if I can do it efficiently through play, then actually I can use your classical economic argument and say, well, I can do it with 3 people, you know, we can do it through play. By the end of it, they're meeting all those targets that you said that you wanted from them, and no one's had a meltdown. No one's, you know, thrown a chair through a window because they've had to sit and do those worksheets and then get their little bit of play, like a prison, you know, get your 1 hour of exercise a day. So yes, I'm conscious of time, so I'd like to do a massive virtual round of applause for Mel. Thank you so much for all of this.
Thank you.
We will take a half an hour break.
Good listening.
Good listening. So thank you. We will join back in about half an hour with for Karen and Lana's sessions, and then we'll be finishing up with the panel. So grab yourself a cup of tea or a beverage of your choice, and thank you so much for taking part.